Sand was the name of my neighbor. I do not think Sand was his real name. Sand had snakes. I think his name could have been Chris, or something between Chris and Chad, but certainly not actually a Chad. He had just some essences of Chad, but he had more essences of Chris, even though he did not look like a 100% Chris. But I do not know what his real name was. It could have been Sand, actually, but I doubt it. Sand lived with a girl who might have been his girlfriend, or sister, or friend. It was hard to tell. This is a recurring theme in my life with neighbors. I have forgotten her name, most likely because it was something normal, and not something like sand, or river, or tree. I would remember that. I have never met someone named Tree. I am certain that they lived below and to the left of me. Whether they lived there before or after the commune of youths, I do not know. The youths would always ask me to buy beer, which meant they were not of age, and I said, no, that is not my job. At the time, I had a patio outside my apartment. At the time, Sand and his roommate, whose name I do not remember, would hang out and smoke weed on my patio furniture all morning. They never asked if they could, but I allowed them. I don't seem to remember my reasoning. I don't seem to remember my reasoning about much. At the time I lived alone, I was recently abandoned by the woman I loved. Sand had 2 snakes. She did not love me after all. Sand sold me raw milk. Or rather, he picked up my share of the raw milk because he woke up earlier than me, because he worked out early in the morning before he would hang out on my patio smoking weed. Ooh, it is good to tell stories where you don't remember it all, because at least then you tell the truth about something. But I know he had 2 snakes. Sorry, I already said that. Sand made me smoothies with raw milk, and if I remember correctly, cantaloupe and cinnamon. The smoothies were good. I grew quite fond of the raw milk. I think I was depressed then looking back. Sand made me work out with them once, and my muscles had never hurt so much in my life. I remember hitting a tire with a sledgehammer. I remember running up steps and gasping for breath. It might be said that Sand and I were friends, but I do not know if I would have said that at the time. But we would put dark rum in the milk and get drunk. Once, Sand asked me to take photos of his roommate and one of the snakes, and I did. And he asked her to undress as I took photos of her, as some of the photos were nudes. Sand asked me to have sex with her, and that's pretty weird, right? I left and went upstairs. Sand began a period of silence with me. He did not smoke weed on my patio for some time. Oh, I forgot to say, one time I watched their snake eat a live chicken in their apartment. It was intense. It all happened very fast. There was very little blood on the floor to clean up. Incredible, I thought. This story is about snakes, after all. What happened was that one morning, he was smoking weed on my patio, and he told me that he had lost one of his snakes, the larger of the 2 pythons. The snake measured at least 6 feet. Sand had fallen asleep hanging out on the patio, smoking weed, hanging out with a python that was not leashed because snakes aren't leashed, which is dangerous. He seemed very calm. I had a kitten then. I thought that it was unacceptable for a snake to be on the loose in our apartments when I had a small kitten who was helpless. I had seen the snake eat a chicken. I found his calmness infuriating. I've heard stories of snakes getting into apartments through the toilets and killing babies and pets and full-grown people. I must have said curse words at Sand. And I hope that I told him to get the fuck off my patio. It's my patio, you snake loser. As in person who loses snakes, not the other use. Not that you aren't a loser, but still. I lived in fear. Fear for the life of my kitten, and fear for my life, and fear for the both of our lives. The threat was a real threat. Snakes come up toilets, that is a fact. These are facts. And I bet you'd like to know if it came up a toilet. And I bet you'd like to know if it ate my kitten. And I bet you'd like to know if it ate me. But we all want so many things. And I think...
He's taller than I am. The lawyer told my dad that his daughter sat in court flipping through flashcards. I had 3 exams the afternoon I faced the judge who sent me to jail. The Creekside Courthouse was so full that day in October that benches were full and kids lined the walls of the room. There were boys and girls. There were cerebral and sensitive literature students amongst engineers I recognized from Hallett Hall, probably caught brewing, holding, or in post-consumption of craft beer. I have never met an engineer then or since that does not delight in craft beer. There were whole fraternities and sorority sisters, self-proclaimed squares, stoners, and the son of a Playboy bunny in court that day. I had carpooled with 3 of my roommates. Minor in possession tickets were the University of Colorado Boulder's great equalizers. Everyone had been cited. My roommates and most everyone else was there to see the judge as a second offender. They would be sentenced en masse to classes, community services, fines. I could predict their crummy criminal until expunged futures. Incidentally, I had passed that disciplinary benchmark several months prior. Admittedly beyond reasonable, I had racked 4 minor in possession offenses and was in violation of contempt of court. I assumed jail was not really on the table, like those warnings on public transit where the punishment for eating, gambling, not wearing shoes, not wearing a shirt, or using a boombox is punishable by total financial ruin and federal blacklisting. It's the sort of punishment that feels a bit extreme, and I am all for punishment. I am a confirmed Catholic, but I'd like it not to exceed the crime. But the prospect alone freaked my parents out, and they hired a lawyer. The lawyer specialized in DUI charges. It was the closest we could find. Minor in possession tickets had never been so heavily handed out that anyone specialized in the offense. He and I met in the school student center to review. God, I remember he moved to nostalgia speaking with me, which happened a lot when I was getting in trouble. People love to share their old party stories, like I would buy the beer for my economics professor / landlord. My lawyer, at $1.50 an hour, ran through some of his good old day stories back when Mac and the Buffs were faces on the field. He ended on cue, one finger down on the stack of papers I had bought, and taking note of the concerned tone of his client, my father, and said, "But it was legal to drink at 19 back then." I should have fired him. I already knew about being 19. I understood I was on the wrong side of the law. I still didn't feel like a criminal. I was partying in college. I was confused why this was shocking. The packed courtroom proved agreement amongst my peers. Despite all the court-ordered therapy I had already completed from prior sentences for earlier MIPs, I did not feel more delinquent than the other kids, though I was set apart. On the day in court, the lawyer escorted me to the juror's box up front. My roommates were in the first row of benches nearest to me. The thing that bothers me the most is the irony of ticketing a 19-year-old girl for drunkenness on campus and sending her on her way with a ticket in hand. Maybe call a cab for the ticketed girl. Just wrap the fees up there with the rest of the fines. It's not just that I didn't care about the consequences, it's that no one, including the people whose job description is to protect and serve, cared. Then the other shoe dropped. The lawyer started, before the judge, "What we have here is a very scared girl from Connecticut in the throes of alcoholism." And all the courtroom chatter stopped. I felt hundreds of eyes on the back of my skull. I remember cranking my neck to look at the lawyer and silently begging him to start to use words like misunderstanding, or immature, or offer a critique on college drinking and popular culture, but that guy went on for a few more minutes in a lawyerly speech, wherein my character was raked over the proverbial coals until he ended with a request for not jail, but rehabilitation. Magistrate Cole was swift. More therapy, 300,000 hours of community service, and 2 nights in Boulder County Jail effective immediately, and the gavel went down. I spoke up in a croak, and to say I had 3 exams in the afternoon. He called me to his bench. The lawyer followed. I explained, if I went to jail from there, I am going to miss my exams. He said, "Report to jail tomorrow." And again, the gavel went down. The lawyer led me back to the juror's box as the judge moved on to call groups of second offenders before him. I exchanged glances with my roommates and figuratively crawled into the caves of their jaw-dropped mouths and died of embarrassment. For those academically interested, I aced all 3 of those exams in that afternoon. In response to the stress of being always in trouble, I had thrown myself into studying. Though when CU got all those papers back from the court, they suspended me, despite my grades. Let me tell you, nothing quite screams party like being a 19-year-old in a house on a college campus with no responsibilities, except for a part-time job in a smoothie shack. My only real obligation was twice-weekly therapy, where women were losing their children to CPS. And then there was me. I stayed up all night on purpose. At 7:30 the next morning, all 5 of my roommates and I piled into a car towards Boulder County. We stopped for bagels and OJ on the way. I paused for a moment outside of the entrance of the building, my roommates at the windows of the car like pretty, young, curious meerkats. Booking took forever. I was mostly alone. The seats were plastic and bolted to the ground. Eventually, another woman showed up. Casey had pissed hot on a random urinary analysis that morning, and she was in her pajamas as she had been taken directly from the lab. Casey and I were put into a small holding cell together to change into faded but starched jumpsuits. I guess we bonded. She was kind in a belligerent way, and she knew everyone in there. When we finally got to the women's dorm, she received a warm welcome. On the way to the dorm, Casey and I were paraded past the large windows of men's quarters. I had to assume inmates could not see out to the hallway, though they leered against the glass and sucked their teeth at us. I was worried about the integrity of Boulder County's infrastructure and the control of the police, and I hated the disconnecting feeling of needing safety in a place I did not want to be and by an authority I did not trust. If either were compromised, a scared girl from Connecticut in the throes of alcoholism could find herself in considerably more trouble than she bargained for. That night, a woman, the head bitch, told me I was sitting in a seat at her table. I moved. The next day, she did not sit in that seat. Jail drama unfolded at hyperspeed. One ages like Vegas, where every 48 hours shows like 10 years. Those evenings, we retired to a common room with books and a TV. We watched Gossip Girl the first night and Dancing with the Stars the second. It was the first time I had seen either show, and I continue to distinctly associate both with jail. One of the girls braided hair. I peeped the library from where I was sitting and tried to get a feel about what was going on without looking at anyone. During the day, Casey led us in speed walking march across the common room and dining room. Otherwise, I slept. People commented on it. I got the impression they thought I was on drugs. I may as well have taken a sleeping pill. I was so tired. They wanted to know what I was in there for, and I told them, truthfully. Some thought I was a little bitch. Others were sympathetic. Angela, an older woman, gave me one of her pillows because I wasn't given one when I was booked. Pillows, evidently, are like currency, and currency distinguishes humans from the dogs. Angela handed over a pillow and said in a low voice, "Don't come back here." "I won't," I replied. Casey and I were both released Saturday afternoon. It took nearly as long for us to get through the exit process as it did to get us booked in. Again, we changed in a small holding cell, Casey back in her pajamas. It felt odd getting back into the clothes I went in with. It really made the experience feel like an exercise in losing time. On the way out the door, a cop said, "You'll be back." And I was insulted on behalf of Casey and myself. Outside, the autumn air was crisp, and the Flatiron shone, and all of my roommates were there just as I left them. Casey gave me a strong hug goodbye, took my bus tokens that they had given us when we were released, and swaggered away into civilian Casey world. Back at our house on the hill, my roommates ragged me about making a jail friend and pressed for details about the inside, and I didn't have a lot of meat to throw them. The women's jumpsuits were red, the men's were orange. The food was shitty. I slept a lot. I regretted I didn't get jail braids when I had the chance. Thanks.
I started dating this guy 2 months ago. He has a 6-year-old daughter who I had not yet met. I hadn't made up my mind about how I felt about the guy yet, and I thought getting mixed up in the life of his daughter would be risky if I wasn't interested in anything more. He had opposite feelings, but didn't push me about it. He was good with me waiting until I was ready. My father died suddenly of a heart attack on Saturday night. After I started making the phone calls to relatives and friends, I started shaking on the floor of my apartment uncontrollably from shock. I moved to a new city, out of state, only 2 months prior, and didn't have many people to rely on or friends around. After some debating, I called the guy because I didn't want to be alone. He invited me over even though his daughter was spending the night in bed, as it was now very late. I caved. I needed to be near someone, and I didn't much care about what the immediate consequences or my own rules about our tenuous relationship meant. We stayed up, mostly drinking bourbon and chatting. He let me talk about my dad. He was unsure how to comfort me, but listened. And when I finally began crying, as I started to fall asleep, just held on to me tighter. The next morning, I woke up to a 6-year-old girl standing above us who desperately wanted to play. I didn't even have enough time to freak out before she was crawling in bed with both of us, wanting the attention of her father and new friend. We played games and shared secrets together in a matter of minutes. She grabbed my hand and took me in the kitchen and made me a bowl of cereal so I could eat with her. Shortly after breakfast, we all climbed back into bed and started watching anime. It was the show Ronja, the robber's daughter, and they excitedly tried to catch me up on the storyline, often interrupting each other with plot details. At 7:30 a.m., my phone started to ring again. I sat in a cold stairwell of the duplex answering questions about my father's medical history and his sexual history to the voice on the end of the line from the organ donor's clinic. It was surreal, to say the least, to sit and answer these intimate questions and in some cases lie because I was too tired to delve into the truth. Yes, I knew my dad smoked pot recreationally, and what does that have to do with being a bone graft donor? No, as far as I knew, my father had never had sex with a man, so what if he did? Did that matter so much for harvesting his eyes? During the exchange, I studied the bottom of a coffee mug, swirling the dregs as if it was going to reveal some truth about the situation to me. And all of this happened while a girl played with her father in the background to the soundtrack of Ronja, which we were watching only minutes before. When I got off the phone, she had told her dad that I had been gone for too long, and we all settled back into the cartoon. I sat with them for a few minutes more, but the magic of games and breakfast in the pre-dawn hours had turned back into a reality that as much as I wanted to, could no longer avoid. I looked at my loosely titled romantic partner, mouthed, "Thank you," and "I'm sorry." I put my shoes on and left them to their day of cartoons and laughter. In the following days, I would often close my eyes and wish to be back there watching cartoons and eating cereal with a 6-year-old completely unshaken and unaffected by my own grief, hiding under bed covers and sharing secrets while her dad looked on.
I just feel more comfortable holding it, so I'm going to do that. Oh, the yesteryears of dating. Back when you were stuck with choosing someone who lived in the same town or went to the same school as you did. Sometimes I feel like my romantic life would have been much easier if I'd lived before the times of the internet and smartphones and Tinder. Back when if you'd learned a married couple were high school sweethearts, you wouldn't immediately muse when they're going to get a divorce. Because you know that they will eventually. My dating and flirting life has had ups, but mostly it's had downs, way downs. You see, for years, I didn't date at all. I was perpetually single, busy dealing with my own struggles of self-hatred and body issues. This went on for about 6 years, just focusing on myself and improving who I felt like I was as a person, to the point where maybe for the first time in my life, I actually liked myself. When I finally did get to the place where I felt okay, I decided to get in on that dating scene. Tinder had already been invented at this point, but at the time, any form of online dating was not something I was willing to sign up for. However, shortly after this story takes place, my attitude toward online dating changed drastically. You see, before I succumbed to the dating by app trend, I was more of a quietly pining over someone until I thought they gave me enough positive signals to make a move. I am not good at picking up signals. I was working at a coffee shop and was friends or friendly acquaintances with several of the other people who worked there. One such acquaintance, who we'll call Bobby, was just the type of guy I loved to pine over. He was grumpy, hated his job, and lived with his mom. In other words, he was a total catch. We got along really well at work most days, and I enjoyed looking at his face a lot. I flirted with him. I thought maybe he was flirting back with me. We went out to lunch one time, and I would go to his dumb band's shows. Oh yeah, did I mention he's a musician? Anyway, at the coffee shop we worked at together, I would often make cookies for all my coworkers. I enjoy baking, but only enough to bake things that take the least amount of effort in the baking world. Like a rebel without a cause, I don't even sift my dry ingredients together. So the cookies I made were always simple, and everybody in the crew seemed to really like them. I made peanut butter cookies most of the time because I was trying to figure out my friend's mom's how she made her peanut butter cookies, since my friend would not give me the recipe for them. His mom sold her baked goods, so's her livelihood, but whatever. Bobby hated peanut butter cookies. Something about how they reminded him of his broken childhood, I think. After I decided that Bobby had given me enough signals for me to be confident in the fact that he probably wanted to date me too, I asked him what kind of cookies were his favorite. He told me oatmeal raisin. I thought that was a ridiculous flavor cookie for anyone to have, but that's fine. I went to the store after work and bought all the things I would need to make the best oatmeal raisin cookies ever. I even rehydrated the raisins in hot water before adding them to the batter. They were as delicious as anyone can make oatmeal raisin cookies. Which, admittedly, is still not very delicious. The next time Bobby and I were scheduled to work together, I brought him the cookies. I wrote his name on my plastic reusable container along with some very flattering things that I cannot remember. I gave him the container of cookies, he said thank you, and I walked away. I was going to ask him out when I handed them to him, but I got nervous. About a half an hour into our shift, I got myself together and followed him into the back room where he was going to get something. Hey, Bobby, I really like you, and I think that maybe you like me too, and I don't know, I think that maybe we should go out. Would you consider going out with me? My voice was shaking, and the words fumbled out of my mouth quickly while falling on each other. He paused and looked at me, and my heart was pounding in my chest while my stomach was sinking. And in that moment, I was thinking about how stupid I had just been to do that. We work together, I thought to myself. What's going to happen if he says no? How are we going to both keep working here after this? Not to mention, I was technically a supervisor, and it's technically against company policy for us to date anyway. And I was technically being incredibly inappropriate. Then he said, "No, I don't think that's a good idea, sorry." Well, did you at least like the cookies? I asked him, desperate for some type of approval. They need more molasses. I didn't even use molasses. That night, I went home and downloaded Tinder.
Hi. Fair warning, I have restless leg syndrome. So I might be fidgety. Okay, by Mona Malone. Grandma by the numbers. I want to tell you, I also have a stutter. I want to tell you about my grandma. I could tell you about her stats, like how she was born on 9/11, or how she was 78 when she died, that she was 4'10" tall, had 4 children, 7 grandchildren, was married to my grandpa for 57 years, and that when she finally found the colon cancer, it was stage 4. But even if you knew all her numbers, it wouldn't be the same as knowing her. You have to know the stories behind the number. She went by 2 letters, GG, which was short for Grandma Geraldine. She had 4 children, and 4 of those children, of those 4 children, 3 were girls, and 2 were middle children. And and 1 was my mom. The 1st and 4th child were golden, but my mom was neither. And that was important. It wasn't until I was in my 20s that I realized how my mom's position as a middle child shaped her whole view of the world, and thus my whole world. And sure, Gigi had 7 grandchildren, but more importantly, when we visited, she made 7 different types of cookies, because she made each of our favorites. And if she was still alive today, she would have 1.5 great-grandchildren. And when they were old enough, she would have made their favorite cookies too. When someone dies, they get reduced to numbers, but the numbers are generic and cold. if they're not accompanied by stories. That she was married to my grandpa for 57 years is impressive by itself, but even more impressive if you've ever been on the receiving end of his temper. The key to that marriage was the number one. Gigi had one good ear and one deaf ear. And as for long as I had known her, she sat with one deaf ear facing my grandpa. So she didn't have to listen to his rants. She would just nod and smile. I always thought that was funny, and probably a key to their long marriage. These are the kinds of stories I don't want to forget about her. Once when my mom was growing up, Gigi took her into town to buy a new dress. My mom couldn't decide between two of them, and Gigi winked at her and whispered, "Get both." Which is only worth noting because something like this had never happened before and never happened again. It was totally out of character. When my grandma was a little girl, her family was so poor that she and her sisters used to walk along the train tracks and collect pieces of coal that had fallen off the trains and take that home to heat the house. Once, when I was this is where I show off my stutter. Once, when I was in elementary school, I stood defiantly with my arms crossed, pouting about something or other, and she forbid me from doing it. I thought she meant pouting, but she meant crossing my arms across my chest. She said people would think we were poor. I didn't understand what she meant. She said that when she was young, neither she nor her nor the other Polish girls could afford a bra, so they stood with their arms crossed to lift their breasts. And the other kids would tease Gigi and the Polish girls, and anyone else who crossed their arms, calling it the Polish bra. I still think about that. I'm wearing one tonight, actually. Whenever I catch myself crossing my arms, I also think about how it's kind of sad that that's one of the only stories I knew about Gigi before she was a Gigi. It's hard for me to think about my grandparents. It's hard for me to think that my grandparents had ever been anything other than old, because ever since I've known them, they've been doing cute old people stuff, like leaving lipstick on your cheek, and sending you $5 in a Valentine's card, and making awkward comments about how your boobies are finally coming in. Whenever Gigi flew to Texas to visit, she brought 2 pieces of carry-on luggage, which were stuffed to the gills with goodies for my brother and me, usually presents or homemade sweets. But one time, I rummaged through her carry-on and found 4 heads of broccoli. Grandma, why did you bring broccoli to Texas? She didn't look embarrassed at all. She matter-of-factly told me that broccoli had been on sale for 49 cents per pound that week. And she wasn't about to let it go to waste. She always loved a good sale. Whenever we traveled, Gigi would find a Catholic church in the town we visit. In any town we visited. And when she walked into that church, in this new place, she would whisper to my brother and me, "New church, 3 wishes." And then she would drop coins in the basket, light candles, and make her wishes. She was still doing this when I was in college. She visited me and asked to see the chapel on campus. "New church, 3 wishes," she whispered, with a twinkle in her eye. "God is not a genie," I told her. Because I was now very old and wise, with my 1 semester of college under my belt. "New church, 3 wishes," she repeated, and shuffled off to light some candles. She had been feeling sick for months before she finally went to the doctor. By that time, the cancer was stage 4. I'm ashamed to say that we were quietly a little mad at her. Colon cancer is one that can be treated easily if you catch it early in the routine colonoscopies. You're supposed to get one once you turn 50, but she had been putting it off for years, too embarrassed, too scared, or worried about the cost to bother with it. And by the time they found it, it was too late. She's been gone for 5 years, and I know others remember her by her numbers. 78 years old, married 57 years, stage 4 cancer. I remember her by her numbers too. 7 types of cookies, 4 heads of broccoli, 3 wishes, 2 dresses, and 1 deaf ear. Hello.
It was 2 days after Donald Trump got elected president. I'm sorry to bring it up, but it's important for context because you remember what it was like, right? The feeling of motion sickness that happens when the whole world suddenly starts spinning in the opposite direction. I was wandering around my neighborhood, staring at my hands, still holding out for the possibility that this was all a dream somehow, and that's when the truck pulled up into my apartment. It was a beat-up-looking pickup driven by a beat-up-looking white guy. He wore a red t-shirt with cut-off sleeves, faded jeans, and basically, picture a quintessential Trump supporter. The kind that filled the room in his rallies, chanting, "Lock her up! Lock her up!" He rolled down his window, waving to me, and before he even opened his mouth, I heard some growling, guttural voice inside my own head say, "Get out of my neighborhood." And when I heard the voice, it freaked me out, because it didn't sound like anything that had come from my own brain, and yet it had. I'd taken one look at this guy and made this automatic tribalistic choice to treat him like an invading species. I hated realizing that I would ever make such a sweeping judgment about a stranger, so I said to myself, "Dial it down, John Brown. You don't even know this guy. It's a tense moment in history, but now more than ever, you need to exercise empathy." So I took a deep breath and exhaled my vitriol as the man in the truck said to me in a thick southern drawl, "Hey there, brother." He called me brother. He stepped out of his truck, and in his arms, he was cradling the most adorable corgi puppy I'd ever seen. And I thought, see, Brendan? He's already proving you wrong just by owning a dog that has no security or hunting applications. He walked up to me and said, "I hope you don't mind me asking, but what's the rent cost here?" I told him what the cost of my 1 bedroom was, and he asked, "Does that include utilities?" I explained how utilities figured in, and then he asked just casually, "Hey, are there any other white people here?" And I said, "Come again?" And again he asked, "Are there any other white people here besides you?" That was his third question. It was the number one thing he needed to know after costs in deciding whether or not to move here. And when I heard it, I said to myself, "Damn it, Brendan, what the hell is wrong with you? You're so prejudiced against this man that you're somehow mishearing whatever he's asking is, are there other white people here? I mean, come on. Nobody would say something that openly racist in 2016. Man, if I'd only known what 2017 would have in store." I decided my biased lizard brain was playing tricks on me, and that what the man had actually said was not, "Are there other white people here?" but are the people all right here? So that's the question I proceeded to answer. I said, "Yeah, you know, I like the people here. Good neighbors. Mostly families with little kids. Pretty quiet most of the time." The man stared at me puzzled for a second, and then he leaned in close and said in a conspiratorial tone, "No, what I'm asking is, are there other white people here? Or is it just colored? Because, you know, you don't want to get surrounded." And as he said this to me, his corgi puppy licked my face. I suppressed a shudder. I'm still not sure how I should have answered this question, Maybe I should have said something like, "Hey, John Wilkes douche. You're in the wrong century to be asking questions like that." Or maybe I should have just grabbed the corgi out of his arms and bolted for the nearest library. But at the time I decided I should just give whatever answer made him the least likely to move here, because if he moved in, it was only a matter of time until a couple of his friends did. And then there goes the neighborhood. So I just told him the truth. I said, "No, I'm the only white guy here." He snorted out a laugh and said, "Yeah, I sort of figured. Good luck, buddy." And he patted me on the shoulder, returned to his truck, and drove back into the American zeitgeist. I'm glad to say I haven't seen him since, but if you are driving around town and you see a redneck in a pickup with an adorable corgi puppy, just know the dog is a red herring. And in this one instance, apparently, you can judge a book by its cover. Thank you.